Welcome to Bruegel Event Suite for the first time since a few months now. We are very happy to reopen our events room for this reopening event, reopening Brussels in this case, reopening Europe slowly. And for the first time, I want to say to our listeners, even if you are not here physically present yet, because that's not possible, but at least we are four speakers in this room, and we are going to discuss this time physically, which is something that we have not been used to anymore. So we are exploring, it's part of this event, we're exploring the reopening and how we are living this moment. So it's kind of historical for the four of us and for our listeners as well that we are here together. I'm Gluseppe Porcaro, the head of outreach and governance at Bruegel, and I would like to present my distinguished guest today, Ilaria Maselli, who is the Vice President of the Board of Directors of Visit Brussels. Visit Brussels is the public tourist agency of the Brussels region. And we have the honor of having Paul Dujardin, who is the Director General and Artistic Director of Beaux-Arts, one of the most prestigious cultural institutions, and I would say much more than just a cultural institution in Brussels. And Guntram Wolff, who is the Director of Bruegel, who has been very much connected with all of you during these months of lockdown, together with me in many live streams during this time. So first, before we start the discussion, I wanted to have a few words about the context of this event. First of all, the context of this event, it's linked to the reopening of the borders that in a few days, especially from the 15th of June on, is going to happen in many different countries in Europe. And secondly, it's linked to the fact that also the city of Brussels itself, which hosts Bruegel and hosts the European institutions and many of our audience, is also reopening slowly. And we at Bruegel, for the first time, we are doing something quite experimental to mark this historical moment that we are going to witness in the next couple of weeks. And we're basically going to hit the road in a few hours, so leaving Brussels and going through different countries. We are going to go with a car and a crew of 3 people. We are going to go to the Netherlands, to Germany, to France, Luxembourg, Austria, Slovenia, and Italy for the next 2 weeks. We are going to drive for more than 2,500 kilometers, perhaps 3,000 kilometers. Why? Because after these months of lockdown, after having been, analyzing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemics on the economy at global level, at national level, at the European level, its impacts on the policies that have been set up in place, we really want to go as well on the ground and see what is really happening, what are the voices that and collect the stories of the economic sectors, but also of the broader society and the political actors on the territories. And we are going to see what we are going to find out in the next 2 weeks. So we are going to have the possibility of streaming some of the stuff. You can follow the projects on the Bruegel channels as well as on the channel of the project itself, which is called Reopening Europe, www.reopeningeurope.com. But beside the advertisement for the event, I will come to the actual subject matter of the event today. We want to start our exploration with the city that hosts us. Also because we've been several times mentioning Brussels in many different papers, analysis, journalistic pieces, interviews, and so on, but always referring to Brussels with the metaphor that Brussels is the European Union, is the European Council, is the European Commission, in a very imperfect kind of manner that the European jargon gives us. But today we are going to speak about Brussels as a city, as a region, as a place, because it is a place that has been experiencing COVID in a certain manner, is a place being the capital of Europe as well with specific local issues. And we're going to explore this with our guests and trying to see how we can learn from this experience. And it's also for us a test run about the kind of questions that we will ask on the way when we're going to be in a much less comfortable environment, meaning like on a square, on a street, and ask to people across Europe the same things. And before starting, in order to give us a little bit of a context, I would like to ask to show a video that we recorded in the past few days in order to see how the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown affected the city of Brussels and how the reopening is looking for some of the inhabitants, some of the citizens of the city.
For us as a bar, well, it meant you had to stay closed, which we understand completely. But then there was this massive lack of communication. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know when you can reopen. Maybe not even, it would have been nice if there was speculation so we could prepare a bit more what we're talking about, because 3 weeks in the beginning didn't really make sense. Well, in Brussels, I guess the biggest measure was 4,000 euros for everyone. A sum meant for 3 weeks, and that was it then. For us, that basically means 1 week of the fixed costs, and then we're 13 weeks later, and there's nothing.
Il y a eu un développement des médias, il y a un développement comme Facebook, d'autres vocales qui nous permettent de dépasser en fait des frontières. Et là d'ailleurs, je suis là aujourd'hui parce que grâce aux médias, on a pu voir une chose terrible qui s'est passée en fait aux États-Unis. Donc c'est grâce à ça qu'on est là aujourd'hui, quoi.
I need to stop and think about what I do. And in the beginning, I just sell plants for ornament. It's not enough. Now I want to do something more real. Voilà. And for that, I beginning to be a jardinerie, and I sold a lot of tomatoes, a lot of plants for eat. And now I think I never stop that. For me, ornament, it's not enough for our life.
Well, for me as a PhD student who is studying between Belgium and the UK, it has been quite problematic because I've not been able to go to the libraries in the UK, and I don't know when I'll be able to do it. So my work and research has been very slow because of that. Also, my work as a consultant has been very busy because there's been quite a lot of stuff to do related to that.
I was trying to digitalize my pedagogy even before the quarantine. So it was an opportunity to teach in another way. I feel that not many teachers do these things, and many teachers they keep on giving homeworks, or they keep on organizing even live session, but just explaining.
It's very hard to see
we're coping with the COVID pandemic, and they have questions about the reopening. I would look now at first at my guests here. I would like to ask to start with Paul, how actually you have been living the closing down those months, and how the cultural sector and Beaux-Arts have been coping with the situation, and then from there, would like to hear the same thing also from Ilaria, so that we can have a first assessment about where do we come from, what has been our experience so far.
don't want to have it in your subconscious, but you don't want to be confronted to that. And then what happened in the mid of February, beginning of March, we thought we will manage it. You know, that's everybody was trying to do that, to manage the problem. And then I think we start to have two camps. These who try to say we can be pragmatic, and then the fear of what will come. And so, as you know, in politics and in ideologies, it's always the minority who have fear who became the majority. You see that in many parliaments. So you can do anything against that. At a certain moment, you are against war. You see that the voice of the media had an enormous impact on the dramatization of that. Because being at home personally was as such not a problem, because I'm from that generation related to the interrail generation of the 80s, and I studied in the DDR in East Germany, and I was one of the first who organized events during the genocide in Yugoslavia, in Sarajevo, in the 90s, where people were confined at their home. So approach was still on Thursday the 12th. We had still a concert without audience in Flagey. It was a start of our major classical music festival, Clara Festival, the classical radio of Belgium, the most important festival after the Second World War. So we had still a performance there without people in the hall. It was a strange feeling, 12th of March. And then came Friday 13th, and I remember at the Last Supper, we know that from the Bible, in our cafe. And so, long story short, now I have a calendar at home from a poet with numbers, days, not only the days of the month, but the days. And so I started to put it in my bedroom with a poetry. So it was interesting to see now that we are 60, 70 days long in this confinement. I was very happy, I must say, mentally, that we had good weather in Brussels. So I think it was for many, you know, these cities in the cosmopolitan, the second most cosmopolitan city of the world, you have a lot of singles and you have a lot of foreigners who live here to work on democracy. And so in certain way, and I will go in if you want to have more information on that, we had a new feeling of home, being at home. What is that? Our relation with our neighbors, up and down in our apartments and so on. So globally, at the end, post factum, I have a good feeling for what happened. I was a little bit shocked in the way legislation, because Belgium, for the other countries following us, the methodology of Belgium was a very strict decision of the government to follow very strict the rules of the scientists. So if I'm looking around, you go off the board with Netherlands, it was much more pragmatic, Protestant, or the responsibility of the citizens. North Rhine-Westphalia reopened much earlier already in Germany. And in France, it's more to do with their long tradition of to make a chart and to share how we can are the innovation who makes difference in Europe. And then then an interesting thing to tell, we didn't decide to stop to work, so we were keeping full employment for all the people at Mozart. So we ran on the exceptions that the 460 people staff at Mozart went on to work and were fully paid. And so mostly the Belgian government decided in regions that they could keep their subvention, but they went on unemployment paid by part of their salaries. As Mozart is a network organization about 750 organizations, we thought it was better for the well-being of all our associates that we went on to work. And we decided in 3 months to transform completely our organization and to do a new renaissance and to reinvent our completely. We go in that detail later, but it was a very good experience on that level.
We will come back to this later also because will be very interesting to go a little bit more in depth about the industry, the creative industry aspect, and what is going to happen afterwards in the next phase. But I would like to ask Ilaria how, I mean, tourism has been from all over the place, all over Europe, has been one of the sectors that has been the most affected by the closures, by the lockdown, by the freedom of movement that has been restricted. So you could perhaps give us a first-hand experience and vision about how the Brussels tourist sector has been living through this crisis, and what have been the challenges.
So, well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here and share thoughts. It's a fantastic event, a fantastic project you're putting together, so I'm honored to be at the beginning of this. So, in terms of personal experience of what happened at the tourism level, I can only report on what the work of Visit is, because the board is in place since 3 weeks, the new board, so this has been basically a very difficult operation for the new board to come in at such a unbelievable, unique times. But I think I'm very supportive of the work that has been done at Visit, because despite the enormous uncertainty that we saw also in the video, that nobody knew how long this was going to last at the beginning. You know, when we said, okay, the lockdown is starting, nobody really knew for how long. And so what Visit did is to immediately start talking to its partners. So there was a consultation process that happened with 360 partners, if I remember correct. And then it was really an exercise of listening, of strengthening these links between the different partners, imagining all the possible events, organization, and the museums, and the transport sector, and you name it. I mean, it's a broad, it's a very complex network of small agencies, small companies that operate in this sector. And so the exercise has been, okay, let's listen, let's try to understand how we can help these people. And so based on this huge exercise, there's been a plan de relance, a recovery plan put in place, that's been approved by the government of Brussels a couple of days ago. And so the idea is to really, okay, let's try to cope. So the plan works, covers 2020, and then a longer exercise will start soon to think about the longer term, because that's another sector. There is another front where there is huge uncertainty, because we don't know what tourism will look like in the next years. So this has been the approach. I think it was the right approach to take. Also keeping in mind that the tourism industry employs something like 10-12% of workers in Brussels, and I really feel for these companies and these workers.
If I may interrupt, when you speak about the tourism industry employs 12%, are you only speaking about hotels and activities that are straightly linked to tourism, or you're also speaking about collateral tourist activities
I
such
would
as
say-
bars, restaurants, and so on?
In a broader sense. So, for example, there is about 6% of people that work in Horeca. There is another 2%, close to 2% of arts and culture. And then there is another 3.5% in the transport sector. So people that connect the airport, for example. So if you put this figure together, we are at something like close to 12%. And it's actually a very interesting sector because it employs a lot of foreigners. So Brussels is a city that has a huge percentage of people that are not Belgian, and the concentration of foreigners in this sector is huge. And also it's all small companies, it's a lot of precarious jobs, it's a lot of minimum wages paid. So it's a labor-intensive, if we want to put it in a strictly economic way, labor-intensive sector, precarious sector, workers at risk are particularly concentrated there. So it's important that Visit started really this exercise from the very start of the lockdown, really trying to understand, okay, what can we do to rescue the sector?
Well, if I may make something in common between what Paul said and what you said, especially when it comes to the economic aspect of the way you've been living this crisis in Brussels, both the creative sector and the tourist sector have this commonality of having quite a chunk of precarious workers within, or like workers that are not like so, guaranteed. That could be laid off in case the capacity, the demand is over there. And I would like to ask Guntram on this a little bit, his first impressions of our fellow Brusselaires on their activities, but also trying to see what can we take as a first observation on these case studies.
Well, thank you, Giuseppe, and first of all, congratulations that you start this wonderful project and provide leadership. I think it's really great to have a geographer and writer in the Bruegel team who can sort of bring this different perspective to the issue. We at Bruegel have been thinking, of course, about the economic implications of the pandemic since the beginning. I think it's very nice to complement that with a view from sort of the bottom-up view, right? Seeing how individual sectors are being affected. Look, I think it's well documented that service sector is much more affected. I think your personal experiences very much reflect, I think, what you also see in the macro statistics. It seems to me, so service sector, transport sector, arts, everything that involves more than a few people at the same time in one room has been heavily affected. So I think this experience is very indicative of, I think, the broader macro picture. Perhaps I can say one word also about how we at Bruegel have been adopting to this situation, because also for us it was, of course, a completely different situation, right? I mean, I remember in February when we realized this is going to be big, talking to the team and the first time telling the young researchers is, oh, by the way, we might have to actually lock down, and they were completely shocked and because also many of them just came here, don't have a big house, the family is in all over Europe, so big effect on these people, just because the situation is so strange. But as an institution, I think we have been really able to adapt very well to the situation, because we've been able to move essentially all of our work online and remote within literally a few days, and have actually managed to also, I would say, create new audiences, new networks, new networks of people with whom we talk through Zoom calls all over Europe. We have created networks of researchers all across Europe that regularly meet. So in many respects, it has been quite an interesting and positive experience, and some of that experience I certainly want to keep in the future, even though not all of it, right? And I guess the one point that I found most difficult as also as a manager, I have to say, is the fact that after a few weeks, it really gets more and more difficult to work together with a team, right? I mean, so the personal interaction is really important at some stage. I mean, it's okay for a few weeks without the personal interaction, but you know, if you lead a team, if you talk with a team on a daily basis, after 3 months, and you really feel like, can we not just sit down and have a coffee and really discuss this a bit more informally than over a Zoom call? And I think that's the kind of sort of challenge that I think in the future all businesses actually have. I mean, yes, a lot can be replaced by screen work. We don't need to travel as much as we did before, for sure not. I think there will be far less travel in the future than we've seen before the pandemic, but I think we will definitely still need to travel and still need to meet people.
So I would like to remind our listeners that they can ask questions on Slido. The hashtag to ask questions is reopen. And I would like also to apologize because I just got some message from our technical team that unfortunately the microphones of Paul was not working properly. So in my follow-up question to Paul, I would also kindly ask him to maybe recap some of the points, or like taking, building on some of the points that he has made before, so that our listeners can get the sense of your first statement. Because indeed, as Guntram said, and as Ilaria said, I mean, it has been all challenging. There's been also a moment, like positive things, negative things. There's a moment of learning. And that's a little bit where I would like to move on the conversation on, like, what do we learn from this now that we are reopening, and how we are in this phase managing this kind of transition ourselves. We are like testing, this very event is like a huge test for us to see if we can do events back into a kind of hybrid format. And this is a little bit what we might want to experiment a little bit, and getting a little bit more better into the creative industry, because you mentioned it, but definitely if our listener didn't listen to it, it will be interesting to repeat.
Yes, the Beaux-Arts being in the heart of Brussels and this capital, and it was also built, I must say, historically after the pandemic of the Spanish disease, just after the First World War in 19, and the dramatic reality of the First World War. And it's interesting to see that at that time, we thought that we had to build a new place that would give some perspectives of a new living together in Europe, to a new middle class, to that culture was a fundamental part of our society. And that was a visionary project of the city of Brussels, because it was the mayor of Brussels at the time, related to his experience that building a building of 34,000 square meters would become a city, and the city as a fundamental part of that living together. And it's today again, we will never come back to what it was in the past. At the same time, I remember that the weekend of the 8th of March, it was a rainy weekend. We had Keith Haring, and we had, I think, about 10,000 people coming to Beaux-Arts that weekend. So it's a place of coming together at the end, before it's an art place in the city. And certainly in the social cohesion of a city and in the well-being of our citizens, we need these places of culture and these meeting places. And the question is certainly in a new reality, certainly for Visit Brussels and related to the global world of tourism, because yesterday I was taking my shower in the morning and I heard again on the radio that the low-cost companies were again selling tickets at 25 euros to go to Barcelona. So, and I said in an interview last week in the Tijd, I hope that the crisis will go on as long as possible, that people decide to change, because I'm a little bit afraid that everybody will come very soon to the old agenda, because we are all engaged as long the situation will be what it is. But change is a difficult thing, and revolution, I'm not believing in that as such. We see that we were implementing in this, from all what we were thinking in the 60s, only in the millennium generation was doing that. So I hope that a transformation of our society will help us, that the digital world was helping us, that also Europeans, and certainly as a think tank in Brussels, that concept of digital humanism, all the ethics related to how we connect and how we are living on all these ethics of your private values and the values we want to share in Europe. It was already an interesting debate, because how we will give our personal life in a public sphere. And so I think that the cultural institution, as Beaux-Arts, together with think tanks and certainly with the European Commission, we are in front of a very challenging reflections how we want to live tomorrow in this new situation, because we don't know how it will be. Opportunities are there by the technology, but the technology will not solve our problems in daily life. And I hope that we will come back to, in the Green Deal of the President of the Commission, what was the vision of a year ago after the elections, that today we come back. That was my personal experience related to the events of Brussels of these last days, related to our common history of Europe and the decolonization and the living together, is a fear of polarization of our society, lack of freedom, and that we feel that we have to be very careful. And for that reason, we started on this project, repairing the future. How can art and intellectuals, philosophers, helping to repair what was broken in our society? And not only the pandemic, but all what is going wrong, and not falling in this populism of fear, because we feel that we are unfair treated, and there will be two ways. Can we bring together again this cohesion in our citizens, and that we have a future together? Or will we go to more and more this confrontation of new realities? And we see it, that the public authorities were fundamental, and that's a form of social democracy. We were fighting for the whole of 20th century to keep these public institutions, and we saw that they were necessary, but we're not ready. So I hope that more populist approach, dismantling the public institutions, not only the cultural institution, globally, we were taking a new way of conscience. But certainly for my city, I think there will be less Chinese coming to Brussels, that we have to work on a more maybe new proximity of tourism or mobility. I would have suggested to take the train and not the car, to do this 2,500, 3,000 kilometers around.
We have an hybrid. We have an hybrid car.
Yes, but to go around and to feel a new feeling of our borders. What is our neighbors? Because they did it differently. When you were in Flanders, you went over the border, the Dutch approach was completely different. And so it's interesting to see that 1 hour you are in Köln, to go to the east was also completely different. So I hope that the experience of our neighbors, you will discuss with all these people, that we can learn a common narrative for the future, keeping our own identity, from Italians in Brussels, and this enormous diversity of the city where I like to live, and to have that, but also to not to be in a new system where I will lose my freedom. Mm-hmm. So that's certainly a real challenge, where Beaux-Arts as an art center in the community, for the community here in Brussels, and we brought more, instead to bring foreigners to Brussels, we went to them. And you will see at Beaux-Arts at Home, our new platform, we were looking around to find this solidarity of many intellectuals on other places of the world. And we will have a new series of Repairing the Future, where we invite, as a think tank in the culture field, complementary to the Bruegel, to invite a lot of intellectuals from all over the world to tell them what we have to do in the future. And that's a work we will keep. Beside that, the life experience that we always do every day. We did at Beaux-Arts, the concerts and so on. We hope that we can come back to this experience. And if you can go on the street for your freedom, or for all what goes wrong, like what happened in Amsterdam yesterday, the day before yesterday, and they could do it in a very good way, then I think you can also do a concert for 10,000 people. A certain way, I hope that culture and the political engagement can find common ways.
Well, you pointed out one of the things that also I think that everyone is now challenged with, but you pointed out in terms of Beaux-Arts, a similar thing to what Guntram mentioned about Bruegel, is that this pandemic is being an opportunity for rethinking the way institutions are the role of these institutions, and also the scope. You mentioned about the fact that many tourists, and we'll come to the tourist aspect in a second, were coming to Beaux-Arts. It was like a place and an attraction. You're trying to reverse the kind of logic that is Beaux-Arts, that is becoming a global institution, that is spreading their own ideas. And this is a little bit the same thing that we're trying to do at Bruegel now. I say, it's not only this meeting room, which was full of people from Brussels or from everywhere. We are now be able to be truly global to a certain extent. And I think that from this point of view, cultural sector and think tanks, academia and so on, as research sector, as a similar challenge from this point of view.
But maybe very shortly, we have to take care, because if we want to have all citizens in Brussels be part of that, be conscious that it's not easy to be inclusive, because we were lucky that we were connected in all what we said, but not everybody was connected.
No, exactly.
Even the school kids in Brussels, it was not easy.
Yeah.
The way the system,
Indeed.
methodology I want to discuss, because that would be another debate. But many people in this city were not connected. And we see it also in other continents, our relation with Africa. Many people today are confined but are not connected, and that's
but we also saw some difficulties from some of the people that we've been interviewed on the streets, the bar manager, for example, and so on. So the situation is much more complicated and complex, of course. But this allows us also to have one of the questions from the audience, because I received a question about if you could talk, I mean, in general, because of these difficulties that your sectors are having, what is your perception of the recovery on your respective case in the coming months? It's Mr. Chen Wei Hua from China Daily who is asking the question.
Okay, for me? So that's not an easy question, I would say, because the reopening literally just started. So we don't know how many companies will survive, how many restaurants will reopen, how many shops will reopen, how many others will file for bankruptcy. So this is not easy to understand what is the, now that the dust starts to settle, how many companies and workers will actually be affected. So not an easy one. Perhaps we should talk again at least in a month to see if we have some numbers. But I would say now the challenge, and it's not easy to talk after Paul because he brings things, in a very high and poetic way and repairing the future, and I bring them at a very practical level. So not an easy task.
But that's exactly what we wanted, like.
But I would say that the big challenge now for the tourism sector is fear, in a way, because there are two groups of people right now. There are those that are saying, there is no way I'm going to take a risk. I will continue to be as confined as possible, some relaxation, but all in all, I will continue a rather isolated life. And then there is the group of enthusiastic people, like me actually, that on Monday, bars open, I went into a bar and had a coffee and sat with a friend. And that was really a fantastic experience. That's also part of the strange times we live in, that something completely normal, like sitting in a bar with a friend for a coffee, becomes this wow, that's true reason of joy. And at the same time, it really broke my heart that you too on Monday. It really broke my heart before the reopening that, you know, I cycled across, I don't know, Place du Châtelain or Flagey, and, you know, there was this fantastic weather we had during the lockdown, and then there was nobody sitting outside. As, you know, the Brusselaars, you know, there is a sun, they will sit outside in a bar, and so it really broke my heart. So coming back to the challenge, so this is really the thing. How do we make sure that people feel comfortable enough that they can go to a museum? So that's part of this plan de relance, of this recovery plan of visit, is really a campaign around hygiene, so that everybody is educated, every institution is educated to respect rules, to enforce the rules, and every person is also pushed to respect the rules in a way that everyone there, you know, we share the space, we should also feel comfortable and confident and trust that we go to a museum and it's safe to go to a museum. So I think this is the first thing. As Paul said, also this creates a lot of opportunities because it will not be easy to travel for some months, and so part of the plan de relance of visit is also about the staycation, this new buzzword.
But by the way, on this thing about the travel, do you have any, because this was also one of the questions from one of our listeners, do you know what was the baseline, what was the ratio of travels to Brussels before, like for business trips or leisure trips?
I would have to check the numbers, but for sure over the last years, the business-related travel in Brussels grew double digits. And that was also actually an objective of Visit Brussels in itself, to in a way take advantage of the fact that a lot of people come here because they come here for work for a day, and maybe they can stay for a couple of days and also discover the city. So there was a whole strategy where a lot of people employed taking care of this strategy and putting it in practice to make sure that business travel becomes an opportunity for the city. And now, of course, this is definitely not on the table. And also, so one question right now in this period of transition is, okay, how long do we expect this to last, and whether this will be still an objective in the long term or not. And there, question mark. It's just a question. I'm not going to give the answer.
And you were saying that one of the strategy of Visit Brussels and in general of the region is now to reconsider the audience, refocus the audience on a local audience instead of the international audience?
So for this year, for sure. I mean, I think it's self-evident that there is not a lot of people that we move across borders.
Because if you think about it, I mean, a lot of Belgian people have been going out of Belgium for holiday, while you had, people from outside coming in. So maybe this is also an opportunity, as you say, to reconsider how you engage with your own citizens?
Definitely. So I think that's really where the opportunity is. And I think it's at two levels. The level of people that live in Brussels that are not from Brussels or not from Belgium necessarily. I think for a lot of people in our community, I mean Europeans in Brussels, a lot of people see Brussels as a sort of golden cage where they come and work. They're here because they work and they don't know the city very often. And so that's a fantastic opportunity for these people to actually change the view about Brussels, not as a city where they are because they work there, but as a city that they can actually enjoy. So there is a whole, as part of this plan de relance, there is this idea of trying to, push Brusselaars to discover their city and also to support their favorite restaurant, for example, to support the local businesses. And the same is true for Belgians in general. There is a lot of Belgians that don't know Brussels at all, and so you are it's a rather small country geographically. So as part of the plan de relance, there is the idea that for this year at least, the main visitors of Brussels will be those that are either in Brussels itself or people that come from nearby, and will finally discover Brussels.
If I'm not wrong, there is also some sort of support grant from the region that was just launched a couple of days ago about staycation. Do you know something more about it? Because
As part of that, there is a funny thing. So every Belgian is entitled to have a train, a ticket with 10 trips, train trips. So you can get your free 10 tickets to visit, to see, to look around. So that's part of this incentive to push this local tourism, like another buzzword that we will see a lot on the next months. So yes, I mean, for the long term, it's very difficult to say. And there will be a discussion that will start soon about what we expect for next year, whether this objective of, attracting people from far away, of attracting business-related tourism, it's still on the table. That's too early to say, we don't know, but definitely there will be a discussion there. But for this year, really, it's about discovering Brussels for the Bruxellaires and the Belgians.
thank you. Guntram, do you want to comment on this?
Well, I mean, I think this idea of the local tourism, I find that quite an interesting idea. And I think, as you say, many Belgians don't know Brussels, right? And they actually don't want to know Brussels even. And if that can change, that would be an interesting development for Belgium. But I think overall, I guess the question is really, what do we think is sort of the medium to long term, right? I mean, and so at the moment we are still all in a mindset thinking, well, in a year's time things will be more or less back to normal, right? And back to as it was before. But it may turn out in a way that it might not be as before, as 1.5 years ago, half a year ago. And then a lot of change will happen. And then the question is what kind of change and how to manage that change, and how the public sector should support that change or should actually accelerate that change, or try to cushion it. Perhaps the future, perhaps there will be less restaurants, right, in the future, because people will take this as a permanent shock, right? And they will permanently be afraid. As you say, there's some people that are afraid, and even with a vaccine, they will have had this experience now and will say, okay, in a year's time, okay, I have the vaccine, but perhaps there's already a new bat which gave a new coronavirus and I'm not vaccinated. So perhaps I'm more cautious, I'm staying more at home, right? So I think there will be quite some fundamental change. There might be really less restaurants, less sort of big gathering activities than we've seen for a very long time. I mean, for not just 1 or 2 years, but several years. And then the question is, what do you do with the people that have actually worked in these sectors? I mean, can they find new jobs? What kind of jobs can they find? How can we transform our economy to these to new sectors where jobs will be safer? I think these are sort of the fascinating things about the medium term, long term. And perhaps one last point on Paul, on the greening. I think it's absolutely. I mean, the greening is one of the key issues, and it seems to me during the pandemic, everybody sort of forgot about the Green Deal. And now it's sort of slowly coming back as a discussion. But my tendency is, I think the tendency will be in many quarters, well, let's focus really primarily on the job creation. And, greening can wait. And I think that would be a missed opportunity because we need to combine the two, right? We need to green and at the same time have the jobs. And, that's where new sectors come in, but there's also very traditional things like insulating houses, right? I mean, I think we should put up a program now really incentivizing to insulate houses. That's good climate policy, and it's very job rich. A lot of people work in these sectors. So these are the things that really have to happen now.
The sound, we are having still a little bit of problems. I think, Guntram, you point out exactly what would be my next question to Paul and Ilaria, which is also bringing us towards the end of this conversation, which is the question about change and the question about the future. And how, I mean, Guntram pointed out, I think that very framing it very correctly about what we should not forget in this moment of change. But what can we imagine more? I mean, Paul, if you were to imagine this change that will come out of this, how do you imagine the city of Brussels? How would you like the city of Brussels to change? I would say, more than doing predictions, because of course it's very difficult now to have a discussion about what do we predict in terms of clear impact. But if you were to make a wish about how the city of Brussels could change out of it, and how, let's say, Europe could change out of it.
But I would dream for, and Ilara would like it, to a One Brussels project where everybody comes together, because that's the reality of what is Brussels today. It's one community. We have to take care, because it was a report was showed and presented by Visit Brussels a year ago, that we are one of these most diverse cities of the world. But the danger is in this sophistication of these new cities that we will not help to have a really integration of all these communities. That's still challenging. To make cities of tomorrow is that we will push out these who are not member of that community to the outside. And as we have two Italians here sitting, I'm looking to a very beautiful narrative related to the City Hall of Siena, where you have this painting about the good and the bad government, about democracy, related to the metaphor of the ecosystems, related to what is agriculture and culture, city life and the land. You have to find a new balance. And Europe, in this New Deal, after this crisis in social Europe, we were fighting for the whole 20th century between the different parties from left and right, that we have not to forget what we built up in the 20th century in this social deal, but in a balanced reality. The cities cannot stay, and that we see in America. If you travel in America, I like all these cities, but you don't see what happens in America because it's not in the cities we visit, because it's on the land. And most of these people left these places. And so I think that these examples are not the right one, in which I would like to dream about a city of tomorrow. And we have the transformation we have in Brussels today with the Green Party and the Social Democrat Party is truly a good step forward. But we have to keep everybody in that community. And that's age, gender, diversity, and so on. And that's a problem in Belgium, because we have, in our form of democracy, we divide a lot of levels. In this pandemic, we saw that 7 ministers were in charge of healthcare. We have many ministers in charge for culture. And so we arrived to a limitation of how we make decisions. And that's a danger we could have, again, in the way of politics, where culture can give a perspective on what could be the future. They can dream, because when you have fear and scare, you cannot have this open mindset from what can be our future. And that I hope that we can part of that in the system, how we develop the police in the sense of the politics of the common, the public places, how we are in these public places. Because if we go back to the fear of the more conservatism of the 19th century, where everybody would go back to his hidden places, and everything is again behind the facade of the houses and not in the public sphere. The form of conservatism I would not like. And as we know, the cycles in our society, where this danger of conservatism is again gaining, we have to fight for that and for our freedom and living together in the public space and sharing our opportunities with as many as possible.
Thank you, Paul. I would like, we have very few minutes left to finish the event. Ilaria, if you want to say a couple of last words for us today.
Yes, no, with pleasure, because I would really think that this is a good opportunity for Brussels. All this change happening right now, all the innovation happening, all the experience, even on a human level that we went through, I think it makes it a good moment for Brussels to claim the role of being the most cosmopolitan city of Europe, to claim this brand of a city that is made of minorities at the end. It's a city where 35% of people are not from here, or perhaps even more because they're not captured by the statistics, and in some communes this percentage is even higher. So if you go to Ixelles or Saint-Gilles, half of the people are not Belgian. I mean, how amazing is that? So it's a city that really has to jump on this narrative and own it and push it, and it has the potential, all the potential to do it. Also because there is a lot that innovation that can come from there. So we know that, you know, innovation and diversity go hand in hand. So if there is a diverse place in Europe, I mean, this is where we're sitting. So there is a huge potential for innovation. There is a huge potential for building, you know, for doing a sort of experiment of how different people can come together and live together and build some sort of dream society, you know, diverse society where people live together and build something new. So I think the time has come for Brussels to claim this role.
I like your optimism. I would like also to point out the challenges, because as Paul said, I mean, to a certain extent to me, and then I want to have a last word from Guntram, but just a tiny little comment on what I'm going to say. Because to me, all these level of governments that they are involved, all these administrative levels, plus the multiculturalism and the variety of people that lives in Brussels, makes me feel that Brussels is really like a microcosmos of what the European Union is, in all the good and the bad. That's also why it's kind of symbolic to start our reflections on the ground from Brussels, because it's very similar to this. So I would just wanted to have like a small snap comment from Guntram about making just a parallelism between the local and the European, in order to see how, if we can observe something, or if we can have a question, not one question that we might need to explore further.
Well, I think the interesting experience of Belgium is, of course, that it's a very divided country with very different views and different experiences, and I think people really have very different experiences in this country, right? And that's what we see also in Europe. And I think what you will see during your trip is that the experience of an Italian will be very different. An Italian entrepreneur will be very different to that of let's say, a German entrepreneur. And I think it would be very interesting to explore these differences in the experiences and see, you know, how can we get them together. And I think what you're doing with this project is fantastic, because you create really a project where you bring those people together, at least in one project, right? And so I really look forward to listening to that project and watching what the output of that project.
Giuseppe, can I add one last thing, a second?
Sure.
No, I would say the tagline to end this event is that if Brussels works, the EU can work.
That's right.
Okay, and the timing is also super important, so that's why we need to come to a conclusion for this. And I thank you all the physical speakers and guests to our event. It was a pleasure to actually have such a human interaction. I wasn't used to it anymore, really. I mean, even on the way we could flow from one person to another, we had to have some time to adjust. I think that we have some time to adjust to this new normal, whatever it is. So thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much, Ilaria. Thank you very much, Guntram. And we are going to hit the road really, literally in 1 hour and a half. We're going to go to Maastricht for our first border crossing, because it seems that the border between Belgium and the Netherlands is open. So we are going to explore over there. We're going to meet our first encounter with the owner of a boat company that does the crossing of the river, which is also the border. And we're going to explore over there directly how the border's closure affected the local economy. Thank you very much, and until next time, bye-bye.
Thank you.